Okay, so get this. Today's deep dive. It's about one single source, but wow, this is going to be a wild ride.
Oh, yeah.
We are diving deep into former President Trump's latest speech, and I know a lot of you out there listening want to understand what he's really saying here.
Absolutely.
Hold on tight, because he covers everything from gas stoves to the Panama Canal.
Yeah, you know what's fascinating to me is how this speech goes way beyond like the typical campaign promises.
Right.
He's touching on everything from like the global economy and energy to very specific domestic issues and even some, let's just say, surprising ideas about geopolitics.
Surprising is an understatement.
Yeah.
You're talking about Canada potentially becoming a state showerheads.
Wow.
And even his take on the future of AI and what it means for energy.
It's a lot.
It's a whirlwind tour of Trump's worldview, and we're going to break it all down.
Yeah, and that's key, right? Because like just listen out what he said. That's not enough.
Right.
We need to understand like why is he saying this?
Right.
How does this speech fit into his overall strategy? What does it reveal about like his priorities if he were to, become president again?
All right, let's unpack this.
Right.
One of the things that really jumps out is how much he emphasizes economic nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps hammering home this made in the USA approach and criticizes trade deals with Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, this is classic Trump, right?
Yeah.
Playing to this idea that America has been taken advantage of in trade deals. And it definitely resonates with voters who feel that globalization has hurt American workers and industries.
For sure.
But what's interesting here is he's not just talking about like bringing back manufacturing jobs.
Right.
He's actually suggesting renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Whoa.
Yeah,
That's a strong statement.
it is.
It seems almost symbolic, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
Like he's trying to draw a line in the sand about America's dominance in the region.
Exactly. It's about projecting strength and a certain American control.
Okay.
And speaking of control, he also takes aim at the Panama Canal.
Yeah, this part really surprised me. He's talking about how unfairly the U.S. is being treated,
Right.
brings up Chinese influence there, and even hints at renegotiating the agreement or even taking control of the canal.
Wow.
That's a pretty huge claim.
It is.
Why do you think he's focusing on the Panama Canal now?
I think it plays into a couple of things.
Okay.
First, it taps into this historical narrative of American involvement in the Panama Canal, right?
Right.
Remember, the U.S. played a key role in its construction and control for decades.
For sure.
But more importantly, it plays into this growing anxiety about China's rising global influence by saying that, China is gaining leverage over the canal.
Right.
He's tapping into fears about China challenging American power.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
It feels like he's trying to make the case that he's the only one who can stand up to China and protect American interests.
exactly. And he ties this into his energy policy as well.
Oh, yeah, the drill, baby drill approach is back in full force.
Oh, yeah.
He's all about boosting oil and gas production, criticizing any restrictions on drilling, and he's extremely skeptical of wind energy.
This is completely consistent with his previous policies.
Right.
He pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement
Yeah.
and really pushed for deregulation of the energy sector. But this time he goes even further
Okay.
by specifically targeting wind energy, claiming it's inefficient and actually harmful to the environment, citing the impact on Wales and Massachusetts.
It seems like he's choosing a side in the renewable energy debate.
He is.
And he's not afraid to call out what he sees as the downsides of wind power.
Right.
But it makes you wonder, what's his alternative?
Well, he does tie this into his predictions about artificial intelligence.
Okay.
He's saying that AI development is going to lead to a massive increase in electricity needs. And he criticizes the push for electric heaters, arguing they're too costly and they don't work as well as gas.
Right.
It's almost as if he's anticipating a future where traditional energy sources will be even more crucial.
So he's not just talking about energy independence, right?
He's also making a statement about what he sees as the most practical and reliable sources of energy for the future.
Yeah,
But of course, this approach completely clashes with concerns about climate change.
absolutely. It raises the question of how the U.S. will balance economic growth, energy independence, and environmental concerns.
Right.
Trump seems to be advocating for a future where traditional energy sources are dominant,
Yeah.
which is going to be controversial to say the least.
Let's say the least.
And this is just the first part of the speech.
I know.
We haven't even gotten to foreign policy or domestic issues yet.
I know. There's so much to unpack here.
Yeah.
He's covered economic nationalism, his take on China and the Panama Canal, and a vision for American energy that seems to run counter to the global shift towards renewables.
Right.
It makes you wonder, where does he go from here?
Let's find out. He gets even more specific when he starts talking about foreign policy, and that's where things get really interesting.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into the foreign policy section of the speech.
Right. Trump spends a lot of time criticizing how Biden has handled the war in Ukraine, saying it could have been prevented, and even suggesting that the U.S. is paying way too much for NATO compared to our European allies.
This is important, because this gets to the heart of Trump's approach to foreign policy.
Right.
He's been known to question the value of these multilateral organizations like NATO,
Right.
and he's often accused of being an isolationist.
Right. But then he also talks about taking a strong stance against both Russia and China.
Yeah.
And even floats the idea of meeting with Putin to talk about Ukraine.
Right.
But not until after he'd be back in office, hypothetically.
Interesting.
It's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he seems to want to pull back from global involvement, but then he's also suggesting these direct negotiations with leaders like Putin. How do you make sense of that?
I think it kind of shows his belief in his own ability to make deals,
Okay.
to negotiate from a position of strength.
Right.
He sees himself as that master deal maker who can get better results for America by going directly to these world leaders.
Okay.
And the timing of this, potential meeting with Putin is interesting too.
Yeah.
Wait until after his inauguration, if that were to happen, suggests that, he might be signaling a potential shift in U.S. policy toward the conflict.
So it's like he's saying, I'll handle this personally on my terms.
Exactly.
But I mean, how realistic is that?
Well, that's a big question, right?
Ooh.
His critics would say it's naive to think that he could just, single-handedly solve these complex geopolitical issues.
Right.
But then his supporters might see it as a sign of confidence.
Yeah.
And, a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Okay. So kind of two different ways to look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
He also briefly touches on the situation in Syria and Turkey's role there, acknowledging how complicated things are in that region.
Yeah, this is a reminder that the Middle East is still, a volatile and strategically important area with multiple players all trying to kind of, increase their influence.
Compete. Yeah.
Trump even mentioned it, even if it was brief, shows that it's still on his radar.
Now, shifting gears back to domestic issues, things get pretty intense here.
Okay.
Trump says he's going to pardon those involved in the January 6th events, including those who were violent.
Wow.
And he keeps emphasizing that no firearms were found among the rioters. He then kind of launches into this whole critique of the FBI and the Department of Justice, claiming that they've become politically motivated and tarnish their own reputations.
This is huge, right? This could have major legal and political consequences.
Yeah.
It shows his support for those involved in the January 6th riot and his, continued distrust of these federal law enforcement agencies.
So it's a controversial move for sure, and one that could further inflame tensions and, divisions in the country.
For sure. It raises serious questions about, the rule of law and the limits of presidential pardon power.
Right.
And by claiming that the FBI and DOJ are politically motivated, he's feeding this narrative of distrust in government institutions, which is dangerous for democracy.
Yeah, I see what you mean. He also expresses frustration with the gag orders that judges in New York have imposed on him, saying that, they're preventing him from exposing these alleged scams. This seems to be a recurring theme for him, this idea that he's being unfairly silenced and targeted by the legal system.
It's a powerful message for his supporters, right, who see him as a victim of a politically motivated witch hunt.
For sure.
It also kind of plays into this broader skepticism of the media and the establishment.
Okay, so we've covered economic nationalism, energy policy, foreign policy, and some really charged domestic issues.
And less.
And just when you think you've heard it all, he throws in some truly unexpected ideas.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Like the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state.
Wow.
He suggests that Canada would be better off joining the U.S.,
Okay.
citing economic and national security reasons.
That's a bold statement.
It is. It seems like he's testing the boundaries of conventional political discourse. I mean, he's known for making these outlandish pronouncements, but it makes you wonder, what's the point?
Right. What's the strategy here?
Huh.
It could be a way to appeal to his base, reinforce his image as a strong leader who's not afraid to shake things up, or it could be a way to distract from other issues.
Right.
It's hard to say for sure.
And then he doesn't stop there.
What else?
He also expresses a desire to acquire Greenland, highlighting its strategic importance.
Hmm.
He even suggests using economic pressure on Denmark to get this done.
This is another example of his, unconventional approach to geopolitics.
Right.
Greenland's location and its resources do make it
Yeah.
strategically valuable.
Yeah.
And Trump seems to be saying that the U.S. should be more assertive in pursuing its interests, even if it means, challenging traditional alliances.
It's almost as if he sees the world as a chessboard,
Uh-huh.
and he's willing to make bold moves to, advance American power.
Exactly. And it raises questions about what could happen if he does this.
Right.
How would other countries react?
Yeah.
Would it lead to greater instability or conflict?
Yeah.
These are things we have to consider.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from trade wars to the future of NATO to some really eyebrow-raising ideas about territorial expansion.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's clear that this speech is about way more than just policy.
Right.
It's about presenting a vision of America's role in the world, a vision that's both nostalgic and deeply ambitious.
Yeah.
It's about strength dominance and a willingness to challenge the existing order.
And whether you agree with his vision or not, you got to understand it,
Right.
analyze it, and engage in an informed debate about, what it all mean.
All right, so we've explored his views on economic nationalism, energy policy, foreign policy, and even the surprising geopolitical ambitions.
Right.
But there's one more piece we need to unpack, his vision for America's future.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so we've explored Trump's views on, everything from trade and energy to foreign policy and those bold geopolitical ideas. But now let's get to the heart of it. What's his vision for America's future?
Well, throughout the speech, he keeps coming back to this idea of a golden age for America, He's painting a picture of the country reclaiming its greatness, becoming that shining example on the world stage, prosperity for all its citizens.
Right.
It's a very optimistic, almost utopian vision.
Yeah, you can really hear that optimism, even a sense of nostalgia when he talks about bringing back manufacturing jobs, achieving energy independence, standing up to rivals like China.
Right.
He's appealing to this idea that America can be great again, like it was in some imagined past.
But it's important to look beyond just the rhetoric,
Right.
This vision, it's built on a foundation of nationalism exclusion and a zero-sum view of international relations, this idea that for America to win, somebody else has to lose.
We see this in his attacks on trade partners, his skepticism of alliances like NATO, and those assertive, even aggressive statements about acquiring Greenland.
Right.
It's a vision that puts American power and interests first above all else.
And it really resonates with a specific part of the population. Those who feel left behind by globalization, disillusioned with politics as usual, and are yearning for a strong leader who promises to restore America's lost glory.
He also talks a lot about restoring common sense to government cutting regulations, letting businesses thrive. He criticizes what he sees as excessive environmental regulations and vows to unleash American energy production.
This taps into a deep-seated belief in individual liberty and a skepticism of government intervention.
Yeah.
It's a message that resonates with those who believe that the government is too big, too intrusive, and stifles economic growth.
He even uses those everyday examples like water-saving appliances and low-flow shower heads.
Well, yeah.
To kind of make his point, saying they're ineffective and annoying. It's a clever way to connect with those everyday frustrations and position himself as a champion of common sense against, that bureaucratic overreach.
That's relatable, right?
Yeah.
Who hasn't struggled with a low-flow shower head?
Exactly.
But it's also a way to sidestep the larger issue of climate change and the need for sustainable practices.
So he's offering solutions that sound simple and appealing, right, but might have some unintended consequences down the line.
Exactly. And that's one of the big tensions in his vision for America's future, right? He's promising prosperity and security, but at what cost? His policies, they often pit economic growth against environmental protection, individual liberty, against collective responsibility, American interests against global cooperation.
It makes you wonder, is it even possible to achieve this vision of American greatness without creating new problems or making the ones we have even worse?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that requires, careful consideration and nuanced debate. We can't just accept his promises at face value.
Right.
We need to critically examine his pronouncements, think about the trade-offs involved, and have those tough conversations about the path forward for America.
This brings us back to you, the listener. Why should you care about this one speech from a former president?
Because it gives us a glimpse into the current political landscape, the anxieties and aspirations that are shaping American society, and the potential direction of the country. It highlights the choices we face as citizens and the consequences those choices can have.
Regardless of your political beliefs, it's crucial to stay informed, think critically, and participate in the ongoing dialogue about America's future.
Trump may be a polarizing figure,
For sure.
but he's tapping into some very real concerns and hopes. Understanding his rhetoric, his appeal, and his vision for America is essential for navigating the complexities of our political system.
And here's a final thought to consider: how much of this speech is concrete policy and how much is strategic rhetoric aimed at a specific audience? It's something to keep in mind, not just when you're listening to Trump, but when you're evaluating the messages of any politician, regardless of their party.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to be careful, listeners, separate substance from spin, and consider the motivations behind the message. It's up to each of us to stay informed, to think critically, and to engage in these thoughtful conversations about the direction of our nation.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit unsettling. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.
Tuning in today for listening in your